My name is Edwin Schmier. I'm the COO and co-founder of Rotational Labs. Welcome to today's webinar on AI for non-technical executives, taking a product approach. Before I introduce Rebecca, I just wanted to offer three very brief points as we go throughout this presentation. The first one is that even though we're talking about AI, it's really in service to people. And that's what we believe matters most, making AI that's beneficial and useful to people, whether it's in their day-to-day jobs or customers or clients. So we want to keep that orientation throughout the presentation. The second point is taking a product approach. And what that really means is we talk a lot about AI and the models, but really it's about grounding AI in real business use cases and problems, having impact metrics, understanding the cost-benefit analysis of using AI. So often that means identifying use cases and, to an extent, being a detective, trying to uncover use cases throughout your organization, going through this process of customer discovery before you even start coding. And then the last insight is thinking beyond chatbots. So chatbots are obviously the dominant interface, what we think of often with LLMs, but LLMs in general are really good at deriving insight and value from unstructured data. And I'm pretty sure all of us work in organizations with a lot of unstructured data. And they're good for lots of different use cases, from classification to auto grading to scoring. And honestly, we do a lot of that in our day-to-day. So just think about those three things as we go throughout this presentation. So without further ado, I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Rebecca Bilbro. She is our CTO and co-founder of Rotational Labs. And she's also the author of Applied Text Analysis, an O'Reilly publication. And if you are on LinkedIn or if you are on TikTok, you might see her as the elder data scientist. That's her handle. It's a nod to her deep experience in this discipline, both the successes and challenges she's seen. And so we are in for a good presentation packed full of insights from Rebecca. So Rebecca, I will let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Edwin, and welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's talk. This is not the kind of talk that I usually give. So if others of you have been to my webinars before, if you've been to my classes at Georgetown, if you kind of follow me, you're used to seeing me put out technical content. I still think of myself as a practitioner, even though I'm an executive now. And potentially some of you are in that same kind of space where you aren't, especially technical anymore, or you're not as hands-on, but you still think of yourself that way. So hopefully this will, motivate and excite all kinds of folks out there, from, formerly technical to never technical, to maybe current practitioners who are imagining that one day they will take on a leadership position and they want to be ready. So welcome to everybody. I want to kind of highlight that for me, one of the big takeaways as I was thinking through what I wanted to really drive home today in this presentation is sort of like being able to recognize the mundane. And I think that is incredibly difficult to do because there is so much distraction out there. So much is going on right now on LinkedIn and advertising, and there's just so much conversation about these big splashy things. But I've been doing this for a long time. My whole career, I've been building language models and doing natural language processing and data science. And I feel like I can say pretty confidently that the main gains that I observe people winning and gaining are when they can kind of focus on mundane things. And so let's try to do that together. So first, I'm going to introduce you a little bit to my team, because honestly, this, the points that I'm going to, mention today are sort of sourced from all of these people that I talk to, and some of the observations that they have as they're working with our clients, and some of the things that they're noticing. And so this is sort of a sourced by the team, including our own intelligent agent, our own AI here, Ensign, who is I consider a part of our team, and that's another theme for today, as you will soon sort of discover. So the big kind of high level message here is that we at Rotational are updating our mental model for how to think about organizations. And I think that it's time maybe some of you come along with us on this journey, because what we are seeing is that when people are willing to think about machine learning as sort of a participant in their organization rather than just sort of a static tool, they're actually getting a lot more value. So we're using the phrase intelligent agent to talk about that, and I'll sort of define what I mean by intelligent agent in just a bit. But just to kind of prime you, it's about kind of moving away from thinking about just people, and thinking about these kind of machine learning models and AI tools, generative AI, as things that you're going to hire onto your team. And when you hire something onto your team, it is your team that is going to be using that tool, right? And so you want to make sure that you are thinking about the impact on the entire team. And if you can do that, you will probably have more success than if you don't do that. And that's what we've just been seeing, working with clients and kind of implementing these solutions. So as Edwin mentioned, we have actually put all of this into a very short book. It's less than 50 pages, so it's a pretty quick read, but it felt really important to sort of write down all of these things that we're observing, because I'm actually not seeing a lot of people talk about this right now. I think that maybe there's just a lot of excitement right now, and it's hard to sort of focus. But as I started thinking about why people maybe aren't really talking about this, we also kind of recognize some other patterns, and we've included those observations in the book and to some degree in this presentation. So very excited to see what you all think, to see if you buy that sort of what we're selling, this idea that it's time to rethink the organization. So what is an intelligent agent? So remember, Gen AI stands for generative. It means it can create things. It's not the same thing as generalized AI. So we are talking about sort of assemblages of models and software that augment everyday people and everyday tasks. This is not like generalized AI. This is not something where you can kind of give a machine some arbitrary task and some instructions, and it will sort of, cook you a steak and also vacuum and organize your email and take your kid to school. This is not what we're talking about. That's actually not real yet. That's, despite what we sort of see, the hype that we see on LinkedIn and all of that, it's not possible to do that yet. And maybe it's not even really interesting to do that, because we're looking for more sort of like holistic solutions, and maybe the fastest path to that is not creating a single model to rule them all, but lots of little tiny things that kind of chip away at the things that make our days harder than they need to be. So I want you to be thinking, when I say intelligent agent, I want you to think boring. I want you to think mundane things. Like small little domain specific things that really understand, a specific type of legal document or specific type of healthcare use case. Small language models, SLMs, not necessarily large language models, but small language models, fine-tuned language models. But what we are seeing, as I'm trying to kind of get across, is that the more that you are willing to sort of recognize these mundane use cases in your organizations, the more meaningfully these little intelligent agents can contribute, rather than trying to solve it by like buying a single artificial intelligence tool that says that it can learn any job function. The reality is that that's not how it works. In my experience, AI models are like interns, right? And it's about how much you're willing to delegate to that intern, but it's also about what an intern is going to be able to learn. So, your intern, your AI model, let's say it's a, fine-tuned language model. It shows up on its first day of work. It's super eager, it's super energetic, and it doesn't really know anything about your use case or what you want it to do. And yes, that is a little bit frustrating. But the faith that we have in our interns is that they're going to learn, they're going to grow to contribute, we're going to nurture them, and they will learn how to help us. They're going to be part of the team, and we're going to invest in them, and they'll likewise contribute to us. And that's how that's how I've learned to think about these models that we build. So what about off-the-shelf AI? So if kind of a custom AI model is like the intern that shows up on their first day of work and they're clueless, but really happy to try to help you. The way that I think about off-the-shelf AI tools is kind of the way that I would interview like a senior engineer on my team. So I'm gonna, ask them, how are you going to augment and energize and support the team that I already have? Because when you hire somebody, that's who your team is going to work with, right? And you don't want to hire somebody who is dismissive or not interested in your mission, right? So when you are evaluating AI tools, if there is no way to kind of meet halfway, if that tool is not interested in your job function, if it's not interested in your domain-specific language, don't hire them, right? Because that's like sort of the recipe for toxicity with people, and it's kind of a recipe for less successful integration implementation when it comes to AI. And ultimately, like Edwin said, this is about people, and no AI tool is worth alienating your human workforce, because you are dependent on your human workforce. So we don't want to alienate them. We want to figure out the problems, the mundane, boring things that are stressing them out, that are making their jobs bad. And we want to try to figure out if we can fix some of those little things to make their lives a little bit easier, because then they're going to be more productive, they're going to be more interested in their job, they're going to be more invested, and they will start to develop trust in intelligent agents. And so they're going to come to you with more suggestions, right? So then you don't have to be responsible for saying, hey, why don't we try this Gen AI tool, right? If you kind of recruit their faith in using these kinds of things, they're going to start coming to you with the use cases, and that's really what you want. Does anybody know this phrase? I'm going to look in the chat really quick. Does anybody recognize this quote? I'll give you a few seconds to see if anybody can get there. Doesn't look like any oh, okay, a few people. Google, yes. So this is from a leaked memo that came out last year. And it was, ostensibly between two engineers at Google. And one of them is saying, we have no moat. We don't have a moat. OpenAI doesn't have a moat. And basically the fear on the part of this Google engineer is that there's no kind of differentiation. And I think that's, so I see Patrick said the word differentiation, and I think that is exactly the fear, that we have been socialized. We grew up seeing Google as sort of this powerhouse of technology. But things are changing. And because the pace of open source development and open source machine learning model publication is moving so quickly, there actually now is concern on the part of these kind of big tech giants that they don't have as much to offer as they maybe would have had. They are not domain experts. And that really, I think when I hear the word moat, my brain thinks domain, right? So if you have a domain, if you know a lot about customer service, if you know a lot about sporting goods, if you know a lot about manufacturing, that is your domain. And knowing that domain means that you are hooked into those mundane use cases, right? You're hooked into the things that are still really hard to do, and Google is not. And I think that's a really interesting observation. I'm not too worried about them, because I think that they figured out how to monetize kind of AI training compute resources. So they're going to figure out how to survive. Probably assuming that all of us will say, "Oh, you don't have a moat. We have a moat. We're going to go and build bespoke models." And where will we build those models? Probably on these cloud resources. So they'll probably be okay. But it is interesting to think about, well, if I have a moat, do I need to defend that moat? Or what do I need to kind of protect my domain, or kind of invest in my domain expertise? And I think the reason that is interesting is that you can start to look inward in the organization, and sort of really start to spot those use cases, rather than looking outward, rather than looking for Google to tell you what to build, because they don't have a moat. Look inward to decide what to build. Resist that impulse to shop for tools that are made by people who also don't have a moat, or at the very least, who don't understand your domain very much and maybe aren't very interested in your domain, right? Resist that urge. Instead, kind of look inward, look for small, real pain points that are happening in your organization. Talk to people. You probably already have these conversations. Maybe you've just never made the connection that this kind of tedious, boring thing with note-taking, or too many emails, or document processing, it's never occurred to you that that is actually what AI is good at. Because what we're seeing is all this advertisement that's making us think that AI is going to replace human creativity. It's kind of a distraction, right? So some of the telltale signs that we have learned to look for at Rotational are things like churn. So if you have like customer churn or employee churn, that's usually a signal that something is not optimal, right? So if it's employee churn, is it because they're doing really boring things over and over? If it's customer churn, some kind of missed opportunity to connect, like, kind of diving in a little bit deeper, that can really bear fruit. Things that are like really tedious data entry tasks. I used to work at Department of Labor at the very beginning of my career, and there were people all over the country doing inspections of workplaces, and the way that they would populate their notes is by entering data. It's amazing to think that that's probably not necessary anymore. Like, manual data entry is probably not necessary for the most part anymore. So kind of looking at some of those things I think is a great way to get started. Edwin made a comment in his introduction where he said, think beyond the chatbot. And I think that is really great advice, because chatbots might be another distraction. Maybe. It sort of depends on what you're doing. But the truth is that they're better now. And you can kind of see this evolution of chatbots. This is from Tim Murphy at Tech Target. I think this is a great infographic, and you can kind of see this evolution where you like suddenly, when I was in graduate school, there were some of these kind of early implementations that were very rote, and then as data science started taking off, people did sort of figure out how to do better, right? And we sort of had this big rise of conversational agents, but they didn't stick. And I don't know if anybody else kind of had this experience in their organization of trying to integrate some sort of conversational agent in like the early 2010s, and just kind of the amount of like difficulty of making the conversational agents integrate with your engineering systems, with your data systems, with your security systems, not to mention trying to get them to more nimbly or effectively or accurately process the text that was coming towards them. So I worked at a company that did help desk technology for a while, and it was incredibly difficult to customize these conversational agents. That's different now. So the conversational agents are way better. I'm not going to argue with that. I think that they're great, and they're, I think it's really cool. It's a novelty. You can kind of have a conversation with a bot now, and that's really cool. That wouldn't have been possible when we were all kids. They're more natural sounding. They're also better integrated with internet search. So, to some extent, it's almost like these chatbots are sort of replacing the way that we think about Googling information. So Google sort of presumes, a single interaction where you sort of search for something and it returns the results, and it's using PageRank and other algorithms to try to give you the thing that it thinks that you want. But that knowledge is based on, limited information. It's what's available, what's been indexed on the web. It's based on your proximity. But if you have a chatbot that is kind of like interacting with you, it can help you get to what you want maybe a little bit better. And I think that's a good way to think about chatbots. They're sort of like the new way of Googling information. And they're much better packaged for distribution, right? It's way easier to get like a subscription to one of these chatbots compared to the conversational agents of 10 or 15 years ago, which were basically a giant piece of software that you had to figure out how to integrate into your architecture, which was really tough. So it's way better for sure. The problem that I think a lot of people are realizing is that chatbots are not domain experts. And so they're pretty good at generic conversation, but when it starts to get into anything that's sort of domain specific, they fall apart pretty quickly, and they do it confidently, right? They're confidently wrong. They'll kind of say these things that do not follow your organizational practices or best practices or anything like that. And that's why you're hearing about things like vector databases and semantic search and RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Those are all attempts to correct for the fact that chatbots aren't domain experts. So they're trying to hook the chatbots into a knowledge base. So it's like, all right, intern, go look at this knowledge base and then give me an answer rather than just responding right away. And that's a good idea. I mean, that does help. But again, like, is a chatbot really what you need? So let's talk about that use case I mentioned of these Department of Labor inspectors that are going out to inspect workplaces to make sure they're safe. They used to have to fill out a form to kind of document everything they discovered as part of that. Is a chatbot really going to make their life easier? Probably not, right? It might be cool and it might seem exciting to have, like a functional chatbot, but the reality is that's probably not going to speed up the process. It's probably not the easiest way to do things. And so we have to think a little bit beyond the obvious here. And it's going to be hard because chatbots have great PR right now. But kind of think about that a little bit. Think about like what would actually take some of the load off of my team. And it might help to think about it in this frame. As programmers, this is a phrase that we use in programming a lot. We talk about automating the boring stuff, and engineers will confidently tell you that they're lazy, right? And that the reason that they code is because they're lazy, and they love the idea that they can write a piece of software to do something on their behalf so they don't have to do it anymore, or write a machine learning model. One of my engineers, Patrick Deziel, wrote a little software program over the weekend for fun to predict which movie would win the Academy Award, and he did, right? So this is sort of about kind of like looking at these sort of mundane things, though. And language models are good at that. They're very good, as Edwin said, at processing unstructured data, automating those tasks that involve reading a lot of documentation, writing a lot of documentation, scoring, evaluating things according to rubrics or kind of some metrics or rules. Those are all great things for language models, and you don't have to do it with a chatbot. You can do other things. Like I said, with the we have no moat memo, open source is moving really fast. It's moving faster than the hosted service providers can keep up. So like the state of the art stuff is not going to be available, through the big cloud providers because it's coming out so fast they can't keep up. so you can use kind of confidently use open source models and feel like you are really at the, the frontier. And if you're, experiencing problems with, models that are like, naive interns that are showing up on the first day and they don't know anything, you can kind of rest assured that there are all kinds of new techniques that are emerging, like transfer learning and fine tuning and retrieval augmented generation, that help you, bootstrap these domain specific models from using the open source repositories like Hugging Face, and kind of augmenting the knowledge with your own knowledge bases that exist already, right? You don't have to create documentation. You already have a ton of documentation. You've got it in Google Drive, you've got it in SharePoint, you've got it in Confluence. So kind of thinking about how do I hook up that information to these other things to augment it, like the same way that you would do with an intern on their first job, right? You give them access to all those documentation, you sort of hope that they will find what they need to orient themselves and start being productive. So again, thinking about where these use cases tend to emerge, these are some of the ways that we have learned to kind of hunt for these with our clients. So we listen to them talk about things like document search or information retrieval type problems, right? So talking about onboarding, talking about how, I can never find, the version of the contract that I needed, the one from 3 years ago, before the migration, right? Things where it's really hard to find documentation. That's a great use case for building sort of a custom, some kind of custom tool, some kind of custom intelligent agent. Another one is document processing. Right. So, we listen to people talk about how in order to scale up, they've had to just keep hiring more and more analysts, because that's the only way that they can sustain kind of a hell of their own making, where they design some like really effective bespoke process for adding value for their customers, but that now it's totally tied to having an analyst drive the entire process, including lots of kind of stuff that is really boring. And frankly, these boring tasks are another clue, right? This is potentially a place where you want to pay attention when somebody's talking about churn or turnover or disengagement or quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is it's a flag. It's a sort of a green flag, right? It tells you that there's probably an opportunity there to develop an intelligent agent. So the key, though, is that we are not talking about magic solutions, right? We want things that will get to production. We want to scope things down. We want to scope things out so we can plan ahead. And the truth is that in spite of the messaging, I think that a lot of us are getting around AI, it is not the same thing as building a website or a database. There is a lot more uncertainty when it comes to machine learning. And you may have people on your team who use that uncertainty as sort of leverage to say, well, we can't really scope this out because it's, who knows what we'll find. And I appreciate that perspective as somebody who does machine learning and data science. It is very hard to plan and scope, but we need to start doing a better job of that, because it like 87% of data science solutions are never making it to production. And that's a huge number. And we need to bring that down. We need to get more things to production. Some of the things that we are noticing that are correlated with success, that are correlated with getting to production with our clients, are that you get good at thinking in hypotheses. And if you read the book, we kind of go into this a little bit more, and you'll see an example when we get to meeting some of the intelligent agents later on in this talk. But getting good at thinking in hypotheses is really helpful, because there's always some implicit hypothesis with any machine learning project, right? So you might say, well, we want to get Gen AI integrated into our Google Drive so that we can find stuff more easily. But there's a hypothesis implicit in there, and the hypothesis is, it's possible to build a language model and connect it to our knowledge base And that model will help, Sue from accounting more easily find the contract from 2 years ago, right? That's a hypothesis, it's a question. And the answer to that hypothesis could be no. Although there are some tricks, and we talk about this in the book, there's some tricks for identifying hypotheses that are likely to fail early on so that you can pivot as early as possible before you've dropped a lot of time and energy and money on prototyping something. So, kind of learning how to think in these hypotheses is really helpful. It's also helpful because sometimes one of the things we see is that there are two stakeholders in an organization who have different hypotheses. And talking about them early on will help that sort of come to light, that this person sort of is expecting this, and this person is expecting this, and somebody is going to be unhappy, maybe both people, right? But kind of figuring that early on is helpful. One of the techniques that we've started doing with our customers is developing these data product requirements documents, and we do talk about this more in the book also. And actually, if you're interested in this stuff, I strongly encourage you to register for Prima Roman's webinar. It's 2 weeks from today, and she's going to do a real deep dive into how to plan and scope and cost out language modeling projects. So that's March 26th at noon Eastern time, and we'll send out kind of all of this information so you can get registered for that. But she'll kind of do a deep dive into this topic. So I'm just going to skim over it for now. So I have some bad news for you, which is one of the other patterns that we notice is that people have a team, like a technical team, but it's not always the right team to do what they want to do. And I think that there's a lot of ways to have a right team, and I'm not going to tell you what the right team is, but I can tell you what some of the red flags are that we are noticing. And basically, there's a real red flag around data scientists who are not interested in building solutions, who want to do research and don't want to build products. So that's a major red flag. And that's actually extremely common because that's sort of how data science came about, right? It was all research in the first 10 years. And a lot of people still think that that's how it's supposed to be, but it's not like that anymore, right? The economy is different. There's a lot more people in the game. It's not enough to just put blog posts out there and publish open source packages. You have to be willing to follow standard engineering best practices. You have to be willing to cost things out, scope things out, and not all data scientists are really prepared or interested in that. Another problem is this idea of throwing things over the wall. That's a major red flag. Right. So if people are sort of expecting that one team is going to build a model and they're going to throw it over the wall to the people who know how to deploy things, that is a extremely lossy situation. The likelihood that it makes it over the wall and into production is really low. And I'm just telling you that from what I've observed over the last 10 years, and increasingly it's getting more and more noticeable, I think, over the last couple of years. I'm not going to dive into this too much, but I actually have in the book, I put in a few interview questions that you can use. So let's say you're starting a team from scratch, you don't have a team, and you want to know how, you're a non-technical leader, right? So you don't know maybe what questions to ask, but I've added a few suggested interview questions in the book that you can look at that I see as good litmus tests for, is this somebody who is kind of the right person to bring on to the team, including green flags and red flags, and sort of an explanation about why I think that those are green and red flags. So we have enough time, I think, for me to introduce you now to some intelligent agents that might help you sort of imagine how this actually works in practice. But I'm going to take a quick break and look at the chat to see if there are questions or anything else that we should answer. Edwin, any kind of burning questions that I should pause for?
We don't have any questions at the moment. We do have some interesting comments, particularly about the impact on employment. Do we see this as potentially taking over jobs, replacing people effectively? How do we feel about that?
I think that that's a great question. The reality is that's probably true, right? So that, I mean, that probably will happen. That happens as technology changes, the job market changes. Right now, the job market for tech is not amazing.
Yeah.
Right? So even for people like me, if I had to go out in the job market, I'd be hitting the pavement, I'd be doing, whiteboard interviews again. Ugh, people would not sort of take it on faith, because there's a huge number of people who are looking for jobs. The economy is not what it was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that's a totally valid question. I think that my focus really is on bringing on tools that let people shine at what they're good at. And so as you sort of see these examples of intelligent agents, and I might have time to maybe just look at one or two, but there's more in the book for people to look at. I hope that you will see that there's always a human in the loop. At least one human in the loop, probably many humans in the loop. Intelligent agents are designed to augment teams, not replace people. And they really are about doing the boring things that you hate doing, that you would want to delegate to an intern anyway, right? So like interns don't, like when you hire an intern, you're not worried that they're going to come and take everybody's job, right? Because they don't know how to do anything yet, right? You're not intimidated by the intern, hopefully, right? I'm not intimidated, but even interns that we hire at Rotational, they're super smart. They know stuff I don't know how to, they know how to use TikTok way better than me. They know their picture of the world is way more up to date than mine, right? They're brand new, they're really hooked in. But they don't intimidate me because I see them as a partner, right? And I'm going to treat them like a teammate and a partner. And I think that if I have that attitude, it's more likely that they will become a contributor and a partner. So that's kind of how I see it. But I think it's a valid concern.
Yeah. A couple other questions have come in. Any specific use cases for data governance or data catalogs?
Data governance. And data catalog. So I'm not totally sure if this is what the person kind of who raised this question is thinking about, but I have this idea that people who have access to big knowledge bases that are not private, right? So databases that or kind of document stores, let's say like a bunch of journal articles collected over the years, things like that. Those kinds of things, people who have a lot of data like that are in a really good, kind of good position in the market to monetize that data by kind of wrapping it in something like retrieval augmented generation and surfacing like a public facing API that allows people to query that data using semantic search. And then you can sell. I mean, what I would do is if I had a bunch of that data, I would wrap that in an API and I would try to sell it to Open API and say, or OpenAI and say, OpenAI is trying to figure out how to make its bots, and Google and all these big guys are trying to figure out how to make their bots less stupid, right? Because their bots don't know the domain, they don't understand this kind of stuff, and so they're trying to add things like retrieval augmented generation. But from my perspective, the people who are in the best position to build those solutions are the people who deeply understand the data and they understand what similarity means in the context of that domain, right? Because an outsider is not going to have that same nuanced understanding of what it means for two things to be similar. So I'm not sure, I guess that's not exactly data governance, but it's sort of like figuring out how to get ahead of the fact that domain data is precious. And the people who are the best governors and curators of that data are the people who actually know that data and know that domain and not outsiders, even if those outsiders are maybe a little bit better at programming, or if they have more venture capital. I think that probably the people who know the data are still in a better position to offer those kinds of things. And that, I think, will become increasingly true as the copyright infringement lawsuits increase. Yeah. So let me introduce you to one of the intelligent agents that we describe in the book. So this is the CSR's assistant. And so we sort of imagine a scenario where we have a customer service team, and that, it's Joe's turn. He's Joe, the customer service rep. He has to basically answer the phone, and people are going to complain. They're going to say, I found a bug in your software. And what he wants to do is kind of respond to this person. At the same time, he has to be looking up the history of the interaction with this client to see, like, has this bug already been logged in our system? How old is the bug? All of this sort of stuff, right? So what if Joe didn't have to actually search? What if this assistant, could kind of start surfacing relevant bug? They just mentioned this bug in the software. It sounds like this other bug, right? That's that sort of semantic similarity. This sounds familiar. That to me seems like a great use case, right? We just make our customers, we're not replacing the customer service rep. We're just kind of giving them the data that they need a little bit faster. It's going to help address issues like, customer churn, also things that are like repetitive data duplication, data entry. And that is totally feasible using sort of a combination of open source tools and techniques like vector databases and semantic similarity and retrieval augmented generation and open source language models. So this is not about replacing the customer service rep. It's about augmenting them so that they can deal with frustrated, customers more nimbly, more effectively, and kind of reduce the data problems that proliferate in kind of the customer service space because it is just too hard to get information in real time. So that's an example. There are a couple more that we talk about in the book. I'm going to skip over them, but we've got a liability monitor. We've got an onboarding buddy idea. So kind of dig into those and let us know what you think. I do want to sort of say, I think that we have to have kind of like our hype detectors on. There's a data scientist and weather researcher named Justin Reed, who I saw him post this comment on a LinkedIn post the other day, and it just like rocked me to my core. He said, so much of the tech industry now feels like a medicine show, pushing quack cures versus actual engineering and science. And I think that one of the other things that leaders need to do is they need to get a little bit more savvy about detecting that hype. I think another thing is, I'm calling these Schmierer's rules of AI monetization as a recognition of my co-founder, Edwin Schmierer, who is our COO, and he is the one who makes sure that we are effectively costing out all of the language models that we build and doing it in a fiscally responsible way. So I'm not going to talk about all of these. We do go into these in the book, but I'm going to talk about the second one a little bit. Which is curb your exploratory compute time. And so I'm not sure if anybody else kind of has a feeling when they hear that phrase, exploratory compute. But this is a data scientist sort of showing their cards, which is like a lot of data science is exploratory compute. And so one of the questions I think that we asked in the poll was like, how long does it take to do EDA? How long does it take to do exploratory data analysis? And I suspect that, for the most part, you feel like it should take a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but not more than that. So if that's true, it might be time to have sort of a hard conversation with some of your tech team and say, are we still on the exploratory data analysis phase? Is it time to kind of abandon this, or is it time to move on to the next phase? But I have observed a lot of teams that just sort of get perpetually stuck in the EDA phase. And they're using the state-of-the-art tools, right? Like they're using Databricks, they're using SageMaker, but they're basically just perpetually in the exploratory data analysis phase, and there's nothing that's making it to production. So that's maybe one thing to think about. Like this is a red flag for kind of really figuring out how to monetize AI and really produce kind of effective, intelligent agents. Because if the data science team is just kind of sitting there visualizing data, and I love visualizing data, right? I'm the one who created Yellowbrick. It's for visualizing the machine learning process. I totally believe in the value of doing that, but you need to time box it, right? So one other thing that I wanted to flag, and actually, I don't know if anybody checked the news this morning, but if you check the news and you search for NVIDIA, there is a lot of news this morning. This is just from kind of my news feed this morning. NVIDIA is sued by authors over AI use of copyrighted works. NVIDIA has joined OpenAI in facing lawsuits for allegedly training AI on copyrighted words. NVIDIA stock drops. The company is facing a copyright lawsuit. So this is like starting to become a very common thing. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. But this is something to be thinking about when you're buying kind of like totally off the shelf Gen AI tools. They're they are not necessarily being scrupulous about how they are using data. And even if all you're doing is sending them prompts and they're returning you text, the prompts that you send them, they own. And so anything that goes into that prompt is fair game for them to use. So just think about that a little bit. Data privacy, I think, is kind of a big blind spot. Although, I'm starting to feel like it's becoming really common for off-the-shelf analytic solutions to mention, data privacy, at least in their advertising. I think that data sourcing and data quality assurance is also starting to get more attention. I think that's great. We haven't seen a lot of big security breaches, which I think means that we're due. In the security world, like if everything's quiet, it means that something big is about to happen, right? So just maybe think about that, maybe preemptively do some things around security, privacy before that big bad thing happens this year, that makes everybody else run for the hills or double down or whatever. Just kind of maybe preempt that. Think about how, the data that you're sending over the wire, think about, what your systems have access to, can't hurt, right? And just kind of like a couple of final thoughts, and then we can probably have time for a couple more questions. So getting the ROI from AI is not guaranteed. Like, that, I don't know what to tell you, but I realize that the hype is sort of making it sound like it's obvious. Like if you can't do it, then you're screwing up, but that's not true, right? It's not obvious. Remember, generative AI and generalized AI are not the same thing. So generative AI means, language models that can kind of produce text, or image models that can produce synthetic images, synthetic music, synthetic whatever. That's generative AI. Generalized AI means like a magic machine that knows everything and can solve anything given sort of like instructions. So generalized AI is a totally different thing. It's sort of theoretical about whether or not it's even possible, right? So it's more in the space of like philosophy or religion. And if you are a business leader, I would recommend that you not focus on that, because I think that is sort of going to be a distraction. So thinking about metrics like context windows or token counts or how many parameters a model has, that doesn't matter for your business, probably, right? Like that's a way to prove that your model is starting to become sentient, maybe. but model sentience is science fiction. It's not real yet. So maybe don't get distracted too much with that stuff. It's, it's fun it's science fiction is fun. I love sci-fi. But we gotta make money. We gotta pay the bills. We gotta pay our employees. So speaking of our employees, right, the problems that they are experiencing and the solutions are super contextual, super contextual, right? Not generalized, contextual. And your grasp of that context is your superpower, right? You understand something that no generative model knows, that no genius AI engineer, however insecure you feel about your understanding of machine learning, your grasp of the context is your leverage. You have the edge because you understand which problems can get solved. And that's really important. So don't sort of sacrifice that, because you're sort of lured in by kind of this sort of magical thinking. Think about your people and the problems that they're struggling with, and let's try to fix those problems. So that's all I got for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. I did share the results of the poll, and it looks like quite a few of us have used AI products in our day-to-day and continue to use them. So it seems like they are beneficial and helpful to some extent. In terms of how long does it take to do exploratory data analysis, almost 70% said 2 weeks, and then the other 30% around 3 months. So that kind of speaks to your idea of kind of iterating rapidly, experimenting a lot, trying to qualify which projects to move forward and which projects to kind of abandon or archive or pivot. And then lastly, how much to fine tune, around half, say around $50,000, and around 40%, say around 100,000. Not many people are in the $1 million range, at least not yet. But we do have a few follow-up questions here. Let's see here. You mentioned 3 to 4 questions that you can ask a technical person when they're coming on to an organization. What about the CEO or the C-suite? So for example, if a member of the executive leadership team brings an AI idea to the executive leadership team, what are 3 questions that a CEO can ask that would help differentiate or help identify if it's worth exploring that particular AI use case?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I can think about that a little bit more. Potentially we can add some more questions in the second edition of the book. But I think, maybe you don't have to ask them any questions at all, right? If you're the CEO, maybe you just have a conversation and ask them to, talk about like their kind of most compelling use cases that they've seen in the wild of how people have been able to use some very specific things, some specific technique like RAG or something like that to solve a problem, and just see if they can answer that question and have a conversation. Like not kind of like a lot of back and forth, but just kind of ask them that question and let them talk for a while. And I think that that's probably, a great way, great litmus test for, is this person, thinking about solving problems? Do they seem passionate about it? Are they really able to think along those lines, or are they really thinking about like, oh, like it's so fun to use this tool to like create visualizations, or like, oh, this model is like the new hot model and all these things. Like if they're talking about those kinds of things, they're going down the wrong path. Get them to talk about problems.
Exactly. Ground it in a business use case, determine what your impact metrics are, how you're going to quantify it, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I would add that what we've seen with our clients is just find a use case and get started. Start developing this capability, because going back to what Rebecca said in the beginning was this collection of humans augmented by a portfolio of models, and these models aren't just passively sitting there, they're doing mundane but important work. It's often transformative when we work with our clients and they see the value, and then suddenly there are 1,000 use cases that open up. So I think it's important to just get started and develop that capability.
Yeah, I think the thing you said about metrics is good. I wish I thought of that too, but now that you've said it, I think that when people say, let's say you're in your board meeting and people are like, oh, we need to find some Gen AI use cases, or we need to figure out how to like compete with our competitor because they've got some new Gen AI tooling and we need to compete with them. Kind of. So making sure that the conversation is like, okay, well, how will we measure? So once let's imagine that the integration happens, we build something and it does something. How are we going to measure the impact? How will we know that it's doing something? Because if the goal is really just to be able to advertise that you're using AI, that's probably not going to take you very far, right? Like it's not going to, if it's really just about marketing, that's what we did the first 10 years of data science. It was mostly, marketing was companies being able to say, we're data driven. We know about this. We're writing open source packages. We're giving conference talks. We're sort of beyond that now. So we need to be able to say, like, how am I going to know? How will we know that this was a success in 2 years? How will we be able to tell?
Exactly. And then one more that's slightly more technical is how do knowledge graphs relate to small language models or LLMs in general?
Oh, that's a great question. So I might point you to an earlier talk. So Dr. Bangford gave a talk 2 weeks ago that was sort of about semantic search and vector databases and kind of the rise of these tools and how they're different from things like Elasticsearch, which is what we used to use in the olden days to do semantic search or search, text search, Lucene search. RAG is a new technique. Knowledge graphs are an old technique. Graphs are kind of an old standard way of structuring information hierarchically. And so one of the things that I think is really cool is to sort of take a knowledge base and extract a knowledge graph from it so that you start to see where the synonyms are. So for example, let's say you have a bunch of documents and they're all domain specific documents. If you scan through all of those documents and you pull out all of the key phrases, and there's Pythonic ways to do this, you pull out all the key phrases, and then for every document that contains that key phrase, you can build a graph that shows you which key phrases are related to each other because they co-occur in the same documents. And if they co-occur a lot, those maybe are synonyms, right? And so if you can kind of derive some notion of similarity or synonyms from that graph, it's just one other way to do like similarity searching, but it's using a graph instead of using vectors. So it's just like a slightly different technique. It kind of depends on the data that you're working with, and you can use both. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Great. Well, we are at our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Rebecca, for your insights. As I mentioned earlier, everyone will get a copy of the slides, as well as a link to the recording and an advanced copy of our AI playbook. So thank you, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.